Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us again on the Will and Dave Show. Quick little content disclaimer as we get into things. Tonight shouldn't be too heavy, but we will probably touch on some things around politics, coronavirus, etc. But nothing especially hairy tonight. We just wanted you to be aware as we get into the show.
Welcome to the Will and Dave Show.
Never get tired of this. I mean, someday I might, but not yet.
I just like hearing your sister introduce us.
Right? It's nice. It's a nice little.
Got to turn it up. It's
It's
quiet
okay.
today.
We'll fix it in post.
There is no post. We are
You are
live,
the post.
baby. Well,
I mean, like for the podcast, we can fix it.
we can. Happy Saturday, William.
Thank you. I love Saturdays. They're arguably my favorite day. Sundays have a lot of religious baggage attached to them. Saturdays are still pretty free and clear in my psyche, so we're good.
Religious what? Religious baggage, did
baggage?
you say?
Baggage, yeah. Baggage.
You know what's good about baggage?
Hmm.
You get to unpack it.
Yeah, over time.
It doesn't take long.
It takes plenty of
Unpack it and
time.
put it away.
It takes plenty of time.
No way.
It took 20 plus years to get it, and it's going to take a few to get rid of it.
Yeah. Shouldn't take that long. It's not that scarring.
Tell that to my metaphorical or my non-existent therapist.
So what are you drinking this week?
This week it is a Stanley Park Brewing Electro Lager. It's a lager. It's okay. It's leftovers from Friday night brews with the boys at work.
What I'd like to have is a cup of coffee, but your mother is working and she didn't bring me one, so I'm SOL.
Suck to suck, I guess.
So I have nothing. So before we get into a whole lot, why don't we thank our sponsors? The sponsor for this episode is Northern Truss, your one-stop shop for floor systems and for all your truss needs. Phone the team at Northern Truss at 250-787-3033. Locally owned and operated in Fort St. John, BC.
Hey there, and thanks for tuning into the Will and Dave Show. I'm Susan, and I don't know about you, but I think that in the whole world there's nothing as warm and comforting as a handmade quilt. And quilters the world over have wonderful stories to tell. So to showcase their stories, I host a podcast. It's called Measure Twice, Cut Once, and Other Life Lessons Learned from Quilters. You can tune in to the podcast anywhere that podcast apps are, whatever your favorite is, or you can find a direct link on my website, stitchedbysusan.com. And now, back to the show.
That was your mother.
Yeah, with her massively successful podcast.
Yes.
If you like our podcast, you can support us at buymeacoffee.com/Will and Dave Show. For the price of a cup of coffee, you can help support us as we try to grow the show into something a little more. No, I don't want to say a little more. I just want to grow the show in general, mostly in terms of audience and outreach. I don't know if the show itself needs growth.
So on that end, what we'd like to ask of you all, our favorite viewers, is what would you like to hear us talk about? And for $5, we'll do it.
I mean, we'll also do it for free if it's a good suggestion. But the $5 certainly bumps you to the top of the line. Capitalism.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's nice to have a space where we can talk about what we care about, what matters to us. But when we're doing it for an audience, it also makes sense for us to take input from the audience and see what they want. What do they want to hear about? First rule of mass media: give the people what they want.
Let them eat cake.
Sky
Was
cake.
it that the first rule? The first rule of mass media?
No, I thought that was give people what they want. It's you can't have your cake and eat it too. Is the cake one?
No, I think it's let them eat cake. Isn't that what Marie Antoinette said?
Maybe. I don't know anything about Marie Antoinette.
You need to read history.
Apparently.
Marie Antoinette, the French queen. I forget who she was married to. So do you know who Gregory Wright is?
Off the top of my head, no.
Well, we're glad to have you in the show, Gregory.
I don't know what that's in reference to, but I like your enthusiasm.
Yeah. We always like having fans of the show who tell us what to do, because it's usually only our better halves. So this way it gets to be you too, who tells us what to do.
Cool.
Yeah. So, Will.
Yes.
So we left last week with sort of a teaser about the alt middle. And you were going to read more about it. I posted a video in our Facebook about the alt middle and sort of got the roots of it. What are your thoughts?
Well, it's for those of you who might not have tuned in last week. We touched on while talking about the epidemic and various things around it, specifically in regards to new travel bans coming up in Canada. And the term alt middle was coined by another YouTuber, I believe his name is ZDog, who is a healthcare practitioner, and he had some opinions on it. And he likes the term alt middle as sort of how to word it. I don't want to say in between. I mean, it is in between, left and right, but it's more of a moderate stance, taking the good from left, the good from right, and making something in the middle. which he gets some flack for in his comment sections that I saw for it being kind of what's the word I'm looking for? I can't think of the word. It's aggressively middling, and people throw around the idea of like, you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. If he's not picking a side, then he's not making a difference, which I don't think is right. He pushes this idea of maintaining a level of neutrality, of avoiding being attached aggressively to either political party and more forming opinions and ideas for yourself based off of the available evidence, which on paper sounds like a fantastic way to go about things. So on paper, I really like the term. I think it's kind of calling it alt anything in relation to politics is kind of like asking people to assume the worst of it, but the term fits, I think.
So in the video I posted on Facebook, I liked how he worded, and I said it in my post, and I'm going to repeat it here a little bit. To assume the role of the other side, or assume the feelings of the other side, is really important, as you can't have a conversation until you have empathy with the other side.
Yeah, as I say, empathy. What a novel concept in a conversation like these.
And it isn't always agreement.
Mm-hmm.
It just is understanding where they come from,
Mm-hmm.
and the roots of their convictions or their argument, and the roots of what they believe. We have to have a bit of understanding about that, or we don't, or it's hard to have a conversation.
Yes, and I agree with that wholeheartedly. I mean, I think bringing empathy into almost any conversation is pretty much an absolute win. There's very few reasons I could think of that empathy in a conversation isn't not only valued, but arguably necessary. But the problem arises when we apply that same, or for me, the problem arises when I apply that same thinking, like being alt middle, being receptive to all these different ideas and being empathetic is good for me as an individual, as just a regular old Joe. I don't know if it applies the same when you're talking about regulatory bodies and governments. Did someone bring you a coffee?
She did. She brought me a coffee.
It's almost like she likes you or something.
I think she does. And what's more, she brought it in my grandpa mug. Let me get it in camera.
Ooh.
Most awesome grandpa. She did. She brought me coffee. I think she loves
Yeah,
me.
I don't know how well that concept of alt middle translates to regulatory bodies.
It's one of these ideas that if I don't argue with you, I agree with you, and I don't like that idea.
Mm.
It happens a lot, and I'm going to blame this on the left a little bit. As it started a few years ago, I believe, with the Occupy Wall Street and some of the feelings which came into the universities, which said that if you don't agree with us, you're wrong. And we can't have you in our universities. We can't have you in our halls. We can't hear you speak. We can't do these things. And it morphed into this: if you don't agree with me, then nobody should hear you. And honestly, I believe in the alt middle. It's saying, hey, it's okay to hear from both sides. It's okay to hear somebody you don't agree with.
Right.
As odds are, there's some truth there from both sides, and not either side.
Yeah. Again, I wholeheartedly agree when we're talking a smaller scale, when we're talking you or me, or even bumping it up a little bit, we're dealing with, universities and public spaces and educational spaces. I think there is room for taking stock from both sides of the argument and doing it in a empathetic way. Or not the argument, any argument, any discussion, any debate, any disagreement. But when we apply that logic, when we attach that to what we were talking about last week with the mandates, with these things, when the government makes rules as it sees it for the betterment of the people that it's governing, like they have to take those things into consideration. I like to think they take them into consideration behind the scenes, but when they make a decision, they have to make a decision. They can't dither about it.
But I think that if the governments which are in power, and this is where I think it does make a difference, is now our governments are reaching not to the alt middle for their votes, it's reaching out to the alt right or alt left.
I see. I don't blame government for that, though.
Why not?
I blame the people, because we have a tendency to gravitate towards alt left and alt right. If we didn't gravitate, if we didn't latch ourselves on to those extreme ideas,
That's a recent
they wouldn't be
thing,
chasing the votes.
That's a recent thing, though, Will.
Oh, it is certainly recently more popular. They've just realized that by playing a hardline stance in politics, they kind of guarantee a chunk of votes.
As in the past, if you were going to win an election, you had to reach the middle voters.
Mm-hmm.
And now they don't.
Yeah, but it's because they realize they don't have to.
I think if they would come to the middle, they would get more votes.
See,
so Gregory, I can appreciate your heartfelt beliefs, but I'm not going to agree with violence in any stretch, in any way, shape, or manner. And I am right of center, but yeah, that ain't going to happen on our show. It ain't going to happen here. So have a hard lemonade and relax.
Please and thanks. That's a very specific drink selection, but I approve.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's tricky because I like to think that if a political party could come out of the gate with ideas that are more center line, more palatable to both halves, and more considerate of both sides of the political spectrum, even if they sit on right or left, but if they can even give the appearance of genuinely and in a heartfelt manner taking in the input from the opposition, from the side that doesn't generally vote for them or agree with them, I think that would go a long ways towards softening hearts and building bridges. But I just think that more and more these days, we as voters are reinforcing the idea that if they pick an extreme side and advertise it better, that's how they win. Because, like, looking at the most recent election in Canada, there were so many interesting things happening, like the Maverick Party here in the west of Canada. That is an interesting concept. That is a different party. That it's obviously taking a more conservative look at things, but because they're smaller, because they are more grassroots, I think they did a much better job of taking in input from all sides and not just from their constituency. But at the end of the day, they got almost no votes because everyone was like, oh, well, we just have to beat the other guy. Doesn't matter how we beat them, gotta beat them. And they dogpiled into their regular voting habits.
And that is, for all the parties in Canada, you really are a two-party system.
Yeah.
There's a million parties which really don't matter. The NDP will play the spoiler. The Bloc is always going to play the spoiler. And
until something happens and the Liberal Party and them swap spots. Yeah. If that happens, like that's the best case scenario for Canada, is that we end up with an NDP conservative two-party system as opposed to a Liberal conservative two-party system.
It's one of these that how do we respect the right of somebody else to be wrong in our mind?
Yeah.
Even if it hurts them, and even if it hurts others. Do we have to protect everybody?
I mean,
does our right to freedom means that I have to protect everybody from harm?
I mean, I think that's a matter of degrees. Does it mean you have to take a bullet for everybody? No. Does it mean you should have to take small steps to help protect those around you? I think that there's a valid argument for that.
Well, I think you should, but
certainly should.
And I think for all of his bravada, I get where Gregory's coming from. Liberty allows us to do things that others might not like.
Yes.
Liberty allows us to do things that might hurt that might have ill effects on other people.
Yes.
And if we make laws which are for everybody to be safer, for everybody to be better, and we say it's in the name of liberty, and you are removing a liberty or freedom from one person and giving it to the group as a whole, is that really liberty?
I like to think so. I think it's closer to liberty than what we have, which is a system of. I'm trying to think how to formulate this. We're arguing a system that equates equivalent value to like total freedom and small freedoms. Like losing some small freedoms is not losing all freedoms. Losing some liberties is not losing all liberties. And when we look at the situation specifically like this epidemic, where losing some small liberties is it's paying massive dividends on a large scale, like a large community scale, why wouldn't we? Like that's something that I still grapple with, because I fiercely hoard my own freedom and my own liberty, and I don't like having to give that away. I have both like external, I talk about how I don't want to give it away, but I also have like little internal subconscious things, like getting my health pass is still, I'm gonna have to force, like I had to force myself to do that because I don't want to. There's a part in the back of my brain that just hates the idea that I'm giving up that nugget of freedom. But in the grand scheme of things, it is tiny. I am taking 5 minutes out of my day to get that on my phone, and then it's done. And I'm not saying that the health pass is saving lives, but other things like wearing a mask.
I do think that this is a part of this conversation, Will. Oh gosh, I just spilled my coffee. When you take one small freedom away and you remove the right to not wear a mask, or you take one small freedom away that says you can drive on the right side of the road and not the left, or you take one small freedom away that says you can only eat at these restaurants if you've been vaccinated. When do those freedoms, where do they end? When do we get to say, wait, enough small freedoms? There's some are for organization, and some, so we say you can only be driving on the right-hand side of the road. Well, okay, that makes sense.
And that is a never-ending and constantly evolving and changing question. I mean, similar things, this is a somewhat extreme example, could be said of things like the draft. I mean, during like things like World War I and II, I'm sure many people did not give a crap about the reasons for World War I and World War II starting, but they ended up going to fight it anyways. And now at least we can look back on it as being some big push for liberty and freedom, and a push for a righteous action to some degree. I mean, many historians would debate that, but just the concept of it, that we gave up something for something better, is never ending. I mean, you look at seatbelts, you look at, I don't want to say gun control laws, but gun registration laws, things like that. We're giving up small freedoms to potentially pay bigger dividends towards general quality of life for the overall populace.
That's a great example. Let's get into that one as an example, as I believe we both sort of agree on this one.
On firearm registration?
Yes.
Right.
Why would you look at that and say that's a freedom which is a good freedom, when we know that the majority of criminals do not register their firearms? The only ones who do are law-abiding citizens.
Yes.
So we take this freedom away from law-abiding people, and we say, you do this, it'll help a problem that we acknowledge they're not the problem.
So are we talking gun control or are we talking gun registration?
Either one. It doesn't matter.
Well, they're
They're two different
two-
things. I realize that. Except
Yeah.
the end result is the majority of violent or gun crimes, they're used by people who are not the registered owners of the guns, if they are registered, and they wouldn't register them if they were if it was their gun.
So yes.
So we take the freedoms away from one whole portion of the population, and we say, you got to
Well,
register. You have to.
registering is fine. Registering shouldn't be a problem. That's like registering, it shouldn't be an issue. We don't look at getting a driver's license most people don't look at getting a driver's license as being a big deal. It involves a test, it involves some studying, it involves some paperwork, and then boom, you're done. I mean, a firearm is a little bit different because it is a lot of deadly power that can fit in your pocket, in theory. I mean, depending, like talking handguns. So I would think that the majority of, when you say the majority of gun crime is done by criminals, most of that is done with small arms. Most of that is done in large cities. But that's not really the kind of firearms violence that I think gun registration laws are looking to curb. I think they're looking to curb things like people who are mentally unstable owning firearms, or youth having easy access to firearms and things like that. I think those are the kind of violence that we're trying to curb with gun registration. Gun registration, as you say, isn't going to do butt kiss against organized crime.
No, I'm not even speaking organized crime. I'm saying those. Let's ignore the crime. Let's look at the. It's a freedom withdrawal. Is we're looking at the vast majority of guns are owned by law-abiding citizens and are used in law-abiding manners.
Mm-hmm.
They just are. There's
Yeah.
no argument on that on the other side. The vast majority of guns are owned legally, and there's no issue. And yet we want to make everybody lose freedoms for a few bad people. And we say, it's for the common good.
Yeah, but it's
But the
again,
but it doesn't equate in practice. And again, I sort of want to ignore the gun issue and use it as a freedom argument.
yeah.
Is it okay to remove the freedoms of everybody for the rotten actions of a few?
We can go deeper down the rabbit hole because it's not even
let's.
removing the freedoms. It's temporarily putting them on hold, and it's only temporarily putting many of them on hold because of people not following guidelines that are supposed to help the problem. If the guy, like, in theory, if COVID regulations were being followed, people were getting vaccinated, people wore their masks,
Right.
people didn't gather, we wouldn't be, in theory, we wouldn't be needing regulations like we have. We wouldn't be needing these mandates and these reductions in freedoms. The reduction in freedom keeps ramping up because more and more people are bucking up against it and refusing, and it's only compounding the problem. It's making it worse. Whereas theoretically, big brackets around that, because it is theoretically, this would be in a much better state. We wouldn't be dealing with as much crap if we had just all gotten vaccinated sooner, all taken the mask mandates more seriously sooner, all socially distanced more diligently sooner. Those things could have made a difference. I want to do a quick throwback, though, to when you mentioned, when we were talking about firearms. I want to reference the gentleman in the comments here. Comments like, I own enough guns to detonate a briefcase nuclear bomb, whatever that's supposed to mean, and other things about mandating a casualty. Those are the reasons we want firearms registration, or I want firearms registrations and background checks, is so people who have crazy ideas like that don't have easy access to firearms. That's why there should be tests and registrations. You're kind of living as an example, at least in the comments. I can't speak about you as a person, just based off of the comments that you're posting. I do appreciate you engaging, though, even if I am kind of harping on you a bit.
I think we both are. It's one of the things that I don't get. I don't get this argument that it's okay to remove a few freedoms for the greater good. As I think we do that at our peril as a society.
Mhm.
I think we do that at our
It's a risk for sure.
yes. And I think that to risk those freedoms for the extremes, and I believe we're seeing this in the pandemic, is we're saying the freedoms for the whole has to be removed, or the freedoms for everybody. Yeah, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying this awfully. The freedoms for the unvaccinated, or for the right, or for whoever is against the vaccines or the lockdowns or the masks, they don't matter, as it's for the
Right.
common good. You run down it's a dangerous road to go down.
I like the way you worded that there, that they don't matter. I think that is definitely a fault of governments and of people left of center like myself, is that we have a tendency to treat people who disagree with us, especially in regards to these mandates, as somehow being a second class. We have a tendency to just go to that, because to us it's just like, well, duh, and that's not fair. And as you say, removing their freedoms, or their freedoms don't matter. I think their freedoms matter as much as anyone's. I really do. And I'm not asking them to give up more than me at any point.
Well, I get that, except you're okay with giving up your freedoms. They're not.
Okay is a relative term.
You're willing to give up your freedoms. Let's put it that way.
I made that cost
Yes.
benefit analysis and came
Yes.
out to a
And you're
different conclusion to
right.
them.
And you're saying,
Yes.
I'm okay with it, or I'm going to agree with it, and you should, even though you don't agree, you should as well. And that's a dangerous road to go down, to say, man, I don't agree, but yeah, we should do it anyways, as I'm sure the government knows best.
I don't think that, but
that is the end result of you saying.
Does the government know better than the average person? Probably. There's enough evidence backing up the government's decisions that I bought into the decision they made.
I think
you know
we
what?
got ourselves.
I would pay good money to see an artist make a rendition of a sleeping bag made of assault rifles. For you, like, just purely for your sake, Greg, I want you to get a sleeping bag one day that is just prints of assault rifles. I want you to live your dream.
And I've been in Wyoming, and you would freeze your nards off in the middle of the sleeping in a sleeping bag made of assault rifles. Have at her, buddy. You'll be singing soprano before the night's done.
It'd be breezy.
Been in Wyoming.
Thank you, sir,
been
for
there,
that
done
wonderful mental image of a assault rifle sleeping bag. I'm gonna enjoy that for a good long while.
Will, I realize that your camera's about to die again, and we'll knock this off here in a minute. I think that this
slight
is
technical difficulties.
This is an issue of the freedom and the middle and the right and the left. It really, for those on the right half of center, it's frightening.
I can see that.
For the alt middle, it's frightening. As the alt middle is also being ignored, and they're saying, "Wait a minute, let's be reasonable here."
I mean, I like to, based on what we've talked about as alt middle, I would like to consider myself part of that demographic. I definitely lean progressively.
Yes, you do. It's near to libertarianism, and we've talked about this.
And I disagree, but we'll get into that another day.
Yeah. It's near to this idea that, hey, it's okay to be you. It's okay to be me. It really is. And when we look at, I don't know, this is a dead horse, and Alt middle is a meme. Yeah, I don't.
I mean,
think
I
so.
hope it's a meme. Memes are popular. I could go with alt middle being more popular.
Yeah. So as
I think this is going to be something that we're going to come back and talk about again in the future
Yes.
as this all unfolds, because I like the thread of this. At the core of this, I love the jumping off point of talking about these things with empathy and with understanding, and I love the continuation as we talk about not just the actual, because everybody hashes the facts and regulations. Everybody hashes that out, but I like talking about why we talk about them, how we talk about them, about how we feel about them. Those are, I feel like that's a niche that we can tap into, and we can keep tapping into for
and those
us
our
as a show.
opinions matter because it's an opinion about a feeling, which is unmeasurable. So our
So is
opinions will.
just as valid as anyone else's.
That's right.
Barack Obama and Donald Trump can have opinions about this, about how they feel, and they
And
are
they're-
just as valid as ours.
Absolutely.
That
Just
makes me
not-
feel special.
What? That your opinion matters as much as Donald Trump's?
Mhm.
I
At
hope.
least in this regard, that
I hope
that
it
tickles my
matters
heart.
more. I hope anybody's matters more.
Please and thank you. Yes, that's a baseline. It's a good
Yes.
baseline.
We are nearing our anniversary of doing this for a year,
Yeah.
and we finally got a guy on the show who wants a sleeping bag made out of assault rifles.
that's that's a wonderful wonderful gradient.
We haven't got anybody on who wants to have wants a sleeping bag made out
Right.
of whatever the left would want a sleeping bag made out of. I don't know.
Oh,
What do they call them? Anyways,
left wants lots of things.
yes.
I mean, it's hard to make a sleeping bag out of things like racial justice. How do you do that?
We could get into that one. So here's our question for you all. You can email us at info@thewillanddaveshow.com, or you can stick it on our Facebook page or here in the comments. What would you like to see for topics? As I'm tired of COVID.
Big mood.
I'm tired of vaccines and mandates, even though it affects our everyday life.
Mhm.
We need some new topics.
Yeah, I feel like we're touching on something interesting with gun registration, firearm registration. I feel like we're touching on something good there that we could delve into.
Okay, I'm gonna end this show here in a minute, but Gregory, if you were in 1939 and you had a time machine, you couldn't sit in your living room in your underwear and throw comments on YouTube about having a sleeping bag made out of assault rifles living in Wyoming.
You can't risk giving that up. That is
that's
an
right.
essential part to living.
So
You're not really living if you're not saying things like that in a YouTube comment section.
one hand, you'd have to live in 1939 in a foxhole in Europe, be freezing your ass off and writing a letter home, and it taking 8 weeks to get there. Or here you could be commenting right now, real time, with a guy in Northern Canada and a guy in the state of Washington. And you don't have to get out of your underwear in your living room to do it. You can have your AR in one hand and your keyboard in the other. Everybody's happy, baby. So
Living the dream.
living the dream. That's right.
But thank you for tuning in, dude. I appreciate you coming, and I appreciate you engaging with the show. Genuinely. Even if we don't see eye to eye, I genuinely appreciate you coming and chiming in.
So on that note, and William, for Gregory, this is especially important.
Right. All right, folks. Stay safe. Don't die. Have a good night.